Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Today, we're diving headfirst into the world of Harry Potter. But we're going beyond just spells and Quidditch matches.
Oh, definitely.
We're tackling a big one, good versus evil. But it's not as simple as it seems in those books, right? It's way more nuanced than just like Gryffindors versus Slytherins.
You hit the nail on the head. What makes Harry Potter so captivating is that it doesn't stick to that simple binary of good versus evil. It really digs into the complexity of morality, showing us that even in a world of magic, people are complicated. Like, they aren't always easily categorized as good or bad.
Yeah, it's like, what's that saying? Don't judge a book by its cover. And man, does that apply to a character like Snape. I mean, for a big chunk of the series, he just seems like this antagonistic kind of scary figure, especially towards Harry.
Oh, for sure.
Like, remember in Prisoner of Azkaban, when Lupin's ill and Snape has to take over defense against the dark arts?
Mm.
He really went after Harry then. You could tell there was so much history there with
Oh.
James and everything.
Absolutely. That scene really shows how well Snape hides his true feelings. On the surface, it looks like he's just being vindictive, almost like he enjoys seeing Harry struggle. But as we go through the books, we learn about Snape's past, like his childhood friendship with Lily and then how they drifted apart and all the regrets he carries.
It's wild how differently you see those scenes when you reread the books, knowing all that.
Right.
And those memories, Snape's memories in Deathly Hallows, total game changer. It's like, wow, his love for Lily was so powerful and he was protecting Harry all along. Even after all those years, it changes everything.
It's incredible. Snape's whole journey is a perfect example of how we can totally misjudge someone based on how they appear. Rowling makes us think he's this villain, but then reveals this depth of emotion and self-sacrifice.
It makes you wonder, are there Snapes in our own lives, people we've categorized without really getting to know them?
That's the point, isn't it? It's like a reminder to look past those surface judgments and think about how complex people really are. And Snape's not the only one who blurs the lines between good and bad. Look at Draco Malfoy.
Oh, yeah, good point.
He's like the poster child for pure blood prejudice, especially in those early books.
Ugh, he was such a bully,
Yeah.
especially to Ron, like in Chamber of Secrets and even in Prisoner of Azkaban. He's constantly trying to prove he's better than everyone else because he's a pure blood.
It's interesting, though, isn't it? His meanness doesn't really come from him being inherently evil. It's more like he was raised that way. All those beliefs were drilled into him from a very young age.
Oh, for sure. He's a product of his environment, absolutely. Like all that pure blood mania from his family, it's hard to escape that. But we do see him, crack a little, don't we?
We do.
And Half-Blood Prince when Voldemort wants him to kill Dumbledore. He's clearly terrified, way in over his head.
That's the turning point for Draco, I think. He's finally seeing what siding with Voldemort really means. All that darkness, up close and personal. He realizes that being a cold-blooded killer, it's not him, even with all his talk.
And even in Deathly Hallows at Malfoy Manor, remember, he hesitates to identify Harry, Ron, and Hermione. It's like he's still clinging to, a little bit of decency.
Exactly. Those moments when he hesitates, they're important. He's not like Voldemort. Draco's not willing to completely cross that line. It shows that even if you grew up in a prejudiced environment, you still have choices. It suggests maybe that we're not completely shaped by how we were raised, but also by the decisions we make.
Like nature versus nurture.
Yeah.
Which, speaking of that, the whole Harry and Voldemort thing, that's like the ultimate nature versus nurture battle, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
They both had such tough childhoods, but ended up on opposite sides of, everything.
Yeah, their paths are fascinating to compare. They were both orphans, both faced incredibly difficult situations growing up.
Harry with the Dursleys,
Yeah.
years of neglect, just awful. And then we learned about Voldemort's childhood from Dumbledore's memories in Half-Blood Prince.
Mm-hmm.
Growing up in that orphanage with no love, no affection, so bleak.
It's like Rowling created this giant experiment, right? Two boys, similar hardships, but they make completely different choices when things get tough.
Exactly. It really drives home this core message of the series. We have the power to choose who we are no matter what our background is.
Right. Voldemort, he's driven by fear and this need for power. He chooses the path of dark magic and cruelty.
But Harry, even when he's tempted by darkness, he always chooses love, friendship, selflessness.
That's the difference.
And remember that scene in Chamber of Secrets with the Sorting Hat? It almost put Harry in Slytherin.
Oh, such a pivotal moment.
It saw that Harry had the potential for ambition, for cunning, all those Slytherin traits.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it was Harry's choice to be with his friends, to be in Gryffindor, that sealed his fate.
Exactly.
It's like this powerful reminder that we're not just stuck with whatever cards we're dealt. We can make choices that shape our destinies.
It all comes back to that famous Dumbledore quote. It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities.
So true. And speaking of choices and what comes after,
Mhm.
you can't ignore how institutions play a role in all this. Like the Ministry of Magic. They're not exactly a model of justice, are they?
That's one of the most interesting parts of this series, I think. Rowling subtly critiques the systems within the wizarding world, showing how institutions can be corrupted, how there are systemic
The
issues.
Ministry.
Yeah.
They often seem more concerned with how things look, maintaining order, than with actual justice.
Yeah.
Like Cornelius Fudge denying that Voldemort's back in Order of the Phoenix.
Yeah.
He was so focused on keeping things under control, making everyone think everything was fine, that he tried to discredit Dumbledore and Harry.
Fudge's actions in Order of the Phoenix are a prime example of how dangerous it can be when leaders prioritize saving their own skin and playing politics over seeking truth and holding people accountable. He embodies how institutions can become part of the problem, not because they're intentionally evil, but because they choose to ignore uncomfortable realities.
And then there's the whole Dementor thing. Using those creatures as guards for Azkaban. They're terrifying. They suck the happiness out of you. To use them like that, knowing how psychologically damaging they are, that shows a total disregard for the well-being of those prisoners.
It's a chilling reminder that even systems designed to uphold justice can perpetuate harm when fear and a lack of compassion take over.
It seems like even in a magical world, governments can be just as flawed as ours.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Can any institution, no matter how noble its goals, truly stay free from the flaws of those in power?
We've covered a lot of ground already. From Snape's hidden deaths to the Ministry's questionable choices, it's obvious that good and evil in the Harry Potter world are anything but black and white. But we're just getting started, right?
Oh, absolutely. We've just scratched the surface. There's so much more to uncover. Stay tuned because in part two, we'll continue our deep dive into the gray areas of good and evil. We'll explore the idea of redemption and how these themes go beyond just individual characters and affect the whole wizarding world.
So we're back, and still exploring good and evil in the Harry Potter universe. It's funny, this whole institutional corruption thing, like with the Ministry, it kind of pops up in other parts of the wizarding world too.
Oh, yeah, totally. It's almost like this undercurrent running through their whole society. You can see it even with Gringotts, the wizarding bank.
Gringotts.
Yeah, in Deathly Hallows. They seem way more worried about profit and security than, like, thinking about the ethics of things.
It's kind of ironic when you think about it.
Mm.
A bank's supposed to be all about safety and trust.
Yeah.
Right? But they're involved in some pretty shady stuff, like the Lestrange Vault, for example.
Oh, yeah.
They knew it was full of dark artifacts.
Exactly. They basically ignore where their client's money comes from, even when it's from something harmful. It makes you wonder, like, how much responsibility do these institutions have to be ethical, even if it means they might lose some money?
It's a good question. Imagine how different things could be if places like Gringotts actually cared about doing the right thing instead of just filling their vaults.
Definitely.
And it's not just the institutions either. Think about how Hagrid's treated, just because he's half giant.
That's another layer of complexity that Rowling tackles. Hagrid's always struggling to be accepted, facing unfair treatment from the Ministry, even some of his coworkers.
Yeah.
It really highlights how deeply ingrained prejudice can lead to actual suffering.
It shows that prejudice isn't always this super obvious thing. Sometimes it's baked into society, hiding behind traditions or the need for order. And it's not just Hagrid either. Think about the house elves, practically treated like slaves.
Hermione's whole SPEW thing, remember, she was really passionate about that.
Oh, yeah.
It forces us to see how easy it is to overlook injustice, especially when it benefits us or it's just been accepted for so long.
Rowling doesn't shy away from these tough topics, does she? She shows us that the fight between good and evil, it's not just about wands and spells.
Right.
It's woven into the very structure of their society. Makes you think about our own world too, doesn't it? Our own systems, our own biases.
Absolutely. It challenges us to look beyond the obvious villains and see how societal norms can actually perpetuate harm, both in the wizarding world and in our own.
Yeah. But even with all this complexity, there's this glimmer of hope, isn't there? The idea of redemption.
Exemption.
Yeah, like even characters who've made really bad choices, they can still change, make things right.
Oh, I see what you mean. You're right. The series is full of these redemption arcs, and they're not always like perfect and clean,
Yeah.
which makes them more realistic. Look at Draco, for instance. Yeah. He never really goes full dark side, but he does some pretty messed up stuff, especially in those first few
He
books.
does.
His journey is fascinating, this whole nature versus nurture thing. He comes from this family obsessed with pureblood supremacy. At first, you think he's doomed to follow the same path.
Right.
But as the story goes on, you see him wrestling with his conscience, questioning what he believes, and in the end, he refuses to completely commit to Voldemort.
He might not ever be a Gryffindor, but
Yep.
he's definitely not the same bully we meet in Sorcerer's Stone.
Exactly. And then there's Snape, of course. His whole story is basically one giant act of redemption.
He's Snape. Oh, yeah, good point.
He spends years trying to fix the mistakes of his past, risking everything to protect Harry, to honor Lily's memory. It's powerful stuff. It really shows how love and sacrifice can transform even the most flawed people.
It makes you think about how we judge others. Like, can we truly forgive someone who's done terrible things? And
Right.
what does that forgiveness even look like?
Those are questions that go beyond just Harry Potter. They make us think about forgiveness, the limits of redemption, the possibility that even people who've caused huge harm can find some kind of peace.
But not everyone gets a redemption arc, right? Some things you just can't come back from.
That's true. This series acknowledges that too. Some people, like Voldemort, they're just so consumed by darkness, so lacking in empathy that true redemption is impossible.
Voldemort, he's a perfect example of that. Power and immortality are all he cares about. He has zero regard for human life. There's no turning back for him.
Voldemort's descent into evil is the opposite of Harry's path. It reminds us that while redemption is possible, it takes a real desire to change, to choose a different way, to make amends for the harm you've caused.
And it raises another question, doesn't it? Are there some actions that are just unforgivable?
Makes you think.
It makes you think about how we even define evil, doesn't it? Is it just the absence of good, or a conscious choice, or something else entirely?
That's a question philosophers have been debating for ages.
I know, right?
And the Harry Potter series, even though it's fiction, it gives us this way to explore those big questions in a way that's both fun and makes you think.
Exactly. We've talked about institutions, individual choices, the idea of redemption. It's amazing how much depth there is to uncover, even in a series that's often seen as just for kids. But before we wrap up this deep dive, there's one more crucial thing to look at:
What's that?
the ripple effect of choices. How the things we do, even small things, can impact the world around us.
Oh, that's huge. It's not just about those big showdowns between good and evil, right?
Right.
It's about all the little decisions people make every day
Yeah.
and what happens because of them.
So for the last part of our journey, let's focus on how individual actions, big or small, can change the course of events in the wizarding world.
I'm ready.
And by extension, how those actions can teach us about our own potential to make a difference. All right, welcome back for the final part of our deep dive into the world of Harry Potter.
The grand finale.
Exactly. So we've been talking about the whole good versus evil thing and how it's not so clear-cut, like with Snape, Draco, even the Ministry itself. But now let's shift gears a bit.
Okay.
Let's talk about how individual actions, even small ones, can have a ripple effect on everything.
Because in the end, it's not just about these epic battles, right? It's about the choices we make every single day and how those choices can impact the world around us.
Exactly. It's like one little thing can set off a chain reaction, like those domino effects.
Oh, yeah.
And in Harry Potter, those choices, well, they often have some pretty big consequences.
Life or death, even.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's think about Harry for a second. His decision to face Voldemort in the Forbidden Forest, in Deathly Hallows.
Oh, powerful stuff.
On the surface, it seems like, okay, he's sacrificing himself.
Right.
Tragic end for the boy who lived.
Right.
But there's so much more to it, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's not just self-sacrifice. It's strategic.
Right. He believes that his death will weaken Voldemort.
Which it does.
But it also, ignites this fire in everyone else who's fighting against Voldemort. It
Yep.
reminds them what they're fighting for.
Exactly. It flips the whole chosen one thing on its head. Harry isn't just destined to defeat Voldemort. He makes a choice to confront evil, even if it means dying. And that inspires others to resist.
So his choice, in a way, leads to Voldemort's downfall. It's like this spark that starts a whole rebellion.
Powerful imagery.
It really shows that even when things seem hopeless, one person's courage can make a difference. Makes you think about your own life, doesn't it?
It does.
Like, you don't have to be Harry Potter to have an impact. And it's not just Harry either. Think about Neville Longbottom. He starts off as this shy, kind of clumsy kid, the one everyone overlooks.
Neville, yeah. He goes through an amazing transformation. He
Right.
goes from being the underdog to a leader who inspires others to stand up for what's right. Think about him in Deathly Hallows, defying the Carrows. He was willing to fight, even when it seemed impossible.
And he destroys the last Horcrux, Nagini.
Ah,
He literally saves the day.
exactly. Neville shows us that heroism can come from anywhere. You don't have to be born special. It can come from necessity, from a sense of justice.
It's like a Rowling is saying that we all have that potential for greatness inside us, just waiting for the right moment. We don't have to be the boy who lived to make a difference.
I love that. It reminds us that even small acts of courage, of standing up for what's right, can contribute to a larger movement.
And that's what makes Harry Potter so special, I think.
What do you mean?
It shows the darkness, yeah. But it also offers hope. Hope that even when things are really bad, our actions still matter.
It's a message that goes way beyond the books. It's about finding that courage, standing up for what you believe in, even when it's hard, even when it feels like you're fighting a losing battle.
Because we're not just watching this world go by, we're part of it. We have the power to shape our own destinies and the destinies of others.
So true.
So as we wrap up our deep dive, here's something to think about.
Oh.
What small act of courage can you do today? What can you do to make the world a little bit better?
Maybe it's speaking up for someone who can't speak for themselves, or showing kindness when someone needs it most, or simply choosing to have hope, even when things are tough.
Because even the tiniest ripple can create waves of change. Welcome, everyone. Ready to dive back into the world of Harry Potter? Today we're tackling a question that sparked endless debates. Can characters like Snape and Draco truly find redemption? And to unpack all of this, we'll be looking at key moments from the books themselves.
Oh, definitely. And it's a fascinating question to explore because when you think about Snape and Draco, they really push us to think about what redemption even means. I mean, they do bad things, no doubt about it, but it's not so black and white with them. Their motivations, their backstories, their actions throughout the series, well, they just leave so much open to interpretation.
Absolutely, and it's those shades of gray that make these characters so compelling.
For sure.
Let's start with Snape. Obviously, his love for Lily is a hugely part of his story, but does that excuse some of his more, let's say, questionable behavior?
Mm.
What about that scene, I think it's in the very first book, where he tries to turn Uncle Vernon into a pig?
Right.
He even says, and I'm quoting here, "Shouldn't have lost me temper, but it didn't work anyway. Meant to turn him into a pig, but I suppose he was so much like a pig anyway, there wasn't much left to do."
It's amazing how even as a kid, you can see that mix of almost cruelty, but also a hint of regret, remorse. Like even then, he's not just pure evil. And that complexity, that duality is key to understanding his character. And it only gets more intense as he gets older, right?
Literally.
I mean, he's constantly at odds with Harry, but at the same time, he's putting himself at risk to protect him over and over.
It's true. He keeps Quirrell from getting the Sorcerer's Stone. He risks his neck to get Dumbledore Veritaserum with Umbridge breathing down his neck. It's a lot to process.
And let's not forget that unbreakable vow to protect Draco in Half-Blood Prince.
Oh, right. Like, he was ready to sacrifice himself. There's no way to brush that off as just following orders or doing his duty.
Mm-hmm.
For me, it points to some serious remorse for his past, a real desire to atone for his role in Lily's death.
You've got a point there. I mean, his actions definitely suggest a deep-seated need to make amends, even if his way of expressing it is, well, very Snape, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But then there's the big question. How do we square all this with him killing Dumbledore?
Oof, that's the one that throws me every single time I reread that part. It's such a pivotal moment, and you just start questioning everything you thought you knew about him. Was it mercy? Or was it cold, calculated for some greater good we don't even fully understand? Maybe because of that vow to protect Draco, he didn't even have a choice.
Exactly. Rowling is so brilliant in how she leaves it deliberately unclear. It forces us as readers to grapple with the fact that with a character like Snape, good and bad are just so tangled up. And that complexity, it makes us wonder if full redemption can even happen when seemingly good actions have these morally iffy origins.
It's like he's reaching for redemption, striving for it, but he just can't escape the darkness that's always been a part of him.
Right. It's always there, lurking beneath the surface. Now, speaking of wrestling with darkness, let's talk about Draco. His journey takes a different turn, but it's just as gripping. Think back to the early
Oh,
books.
I know where you're going with this.
He's a straight up bully, no sugarcoating it, mocking Harry constantly, loving his pure blood status, joining the Inquisitorial Squad like it's the best club ever.
Yeah. You know that scene that always gets me? When he calls Hermione a mudblood and Chamber of
Oh,
Secrets?
for sure. Awful.
It just makes you cringe, right? It shows how deep his prejudice runs, especially in those early books.
Totally. It's right there on the surface. But things take a darker turn when Voldemort gives him that mission murder Dumbledore. And from there, you see this change in Draco the anxiety, the botched attempts, the sheer terror in his eyes. It makes you wonder was he really incapable of killing Dumbledore?
Or was there something good, a spark of something decent inside him that stopped him from committing that final horrible act? It's so hard to say for sure, but when you see those moments of hesitation, it definitely paints a different picture than the Draco we saw before.
It's like he's starting to question everything he was brought up to believe, realizing that this path he's on, it's leading him to a really dark place. But even after he refuses to kill Dumbledore, he doesn't totally abandon his prejudices or his family. It's not a clean break.
He's still so caught between wanting his family's acceptance and this growing realization that they might be, well, completely on the wrong side.
Yeah, it's this constant tug of war.
He's definitely not a saint by the end, that's for sure. But those moments where he stands up to Voldemort, they show he's capable of choosing something different.
And that brings us to this bigger question about redemption, doesn't it? It's not about suddenly becoming perfect or having your past just wiped clean. It's way messier than that. It's full of contradictions, internal struggles.
And both Snape and Draco embody that perfectly, right?
Right.
Their choices. You can't easily categorize them as good or bad. It makes you wonder, can you ever truly redeem yourself if you've done terrible things? Or is it more about trying to be better, to make amends, even if you can't erase the past?
That's the million galleon question, isn't it?
It really is.
And it's a question we'll be diving deeper into as we continue exploring these fascinating characters. So stick with us, folks, because there's a lot more to uncover.
Yeah.
You hit it right on the head there. Redemption isn't some switch that flips. It's this constant battle, the struggle to overcome those darker impulses within yourself. And it's interesting how Rowling uses these small, almost subtle moments to hint at that struggle, both with Snape and Draco.
Oh, I think I see where you're going with this.
Yeah.
Like, for example, in Prisoner of Azkaban, when Harry thinks he sees Sirius Black attacking Ron, and Snape he completely loses it. He even threatens Lupin, and we find out later that Lupin's a werewolf. Not exactly a good look for Snape.
You're right, it's not. But his reaction, once the truth comes out about Sirius being innocent in Pettigrew's betrayal, it's fascinating. He's furious, of course, but it's not just about Black getting away. It's deeper than that. He's angry because he wanted to be the one to catch Sirius, to punish him for what he thought Sirius did to Lily.
So you're saying even his anger, his rage, is still tied to Lily, almost like he's trying to, I don't know, avenge her in some twisted way.
Exactly. It just goes to show how layered his motivations are. It's not simple hatred or bitterness. There's this deep, unresolved grief there. And it's driving so much of his behavior, even years later.
Yeah.
And in a way, I think it shows that even those negative emotions, they can be rooted in something profound, something that speaks to that longing for redemption he carries.
So even Snape's darkest impulses, they're still connected to this love that he just can't let go of. It's almost, I don't know, tragic when you think about it. Like his inability to move on from the past is both fueling his desire for redemption, but it's also holding him back at the same time.
It really is. And it's a pretty stark contrast to what we see with Draco, wouldn't you say? Where Snape's love for Lily is this driving force, Draco starts to question that blind loyalty that he has for his family. He starts to see that their values, the things that he's always believed in, they might not be as righteous as he once thought.
Yeah, you can see that starting to happen in Order of the Phoenix when Lucius Malfoy is sent to Azkaban. Draco becomes obsessed with getting revenge on Harry, wanting to prove himself to Voldemort and, I guess, restore his family's honor in a way. But by doing that, he gets this front row seat to the dark side, to what Voldemort is really about.
He's pulled deeper into Voldemort's inner circle and starts to see the real cost of that blind loyalty. And then in Half-Blood Prince, he's given this impossible mission, and he's clearly in over his head. He's terrified, failing at every turn, and it becomes obvious that he never wanted to be a killer. Not really.
It's like that moment of realization for Draco. The path he's on, it only leads to destruction, and the values that he's always held on to, they've only brought him pain and fear.
Precisely, and that's the turning point for him, wouldn't you say? It's where he starts to separate himself, even just a little bit, from the darkness that has, kind of defined his life up to that point. It's the start of this internal conflict for him, that struggle between who he was raised to be and who he might actually be able to become.
And yet, even with that realization, he still doesn't completely turn his back on his family or what they believe. He's still, kind of snide to Harry. He still looks down on Muggle-borns.
This is what makes Draco's path to redemption so interesting. It's not a complete 180. It's full of these stops and starts. He makes the choice to defy Voldemort, refuses to kill Dumbledore, but he can't completely let go of those prejudices he was raised with. He's stuck in this in-between space, wrestling with his past even as he tries to move away from it.
So both Snape and Draco, they're showing us that redemption isn't about wiping the slate clean. It's about confronting those deep-seated biases, those beliefs, and making choices that go against what people expect. It's about looking at yourself, even the parts you don't like, and choosing a different path.
Exactly. And this whole idea, confronting your past, those parts of yourself you might not be proud of,
Huh.
that resonates so much beyond just these books. It's something we all grapple with, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. We've all made mistakes. We've all hurt people, maybe even been blinded by our own biases. But just like Snape and Draco, we still have the power to choose something different.
And that's what's so powerful about their journeys, right? They remind us that even after making terrible choices, after causing harm, we can still choose to be better.
Okay, so we've been talking about these big turning points. Snape protecting Harry, Draco standing up to Voldemort. But what about those smaller choices, the everyday stuff? Does that play a role in this whole redemption arc?
It absolutely does. Redemption, it's not just about these grand, sweeping gestures. It's about the daily decisions, those little acts of kindness, those moments of compassion. It's about how you treat other people, how you react to challenges, how you choose to view the world around you.
So even though Snape is still, well, let's face it, awful to his students, the fact that he's willing to put his life on the line for Harry, that still matters.
Yes. It shows that there's a willingness there to change, to act against his own nature, even if it's just for a few people. Remember, redemption is about progress, not perfection. It's about recognizing those flaws,
Yeah.
understanding the hurt you've caused, and actively trying to make amends.
This brings up a question I've always wondered about. What about someone like Pettigrew? I mean, he betrayed his friends, he caused so much death and destruction. Is there any coming back from that? Can someone who's done such awful things ever truly find redemption?
That's a really tough one. And honestly, I think Rowling leaves it unanswered on purpose. It makes you think about the limits of forgiveness, the weight of certain actions. Can anyone really atone for causing that much harm? It's a question we each have to grapple with on our own, I think.
It really gets you thinking about the complexities of human nature, doesn't it? That we're all capable of great good and terrible evil. And sometimes the line between the two, well, is pretty blurry.
You're right. And that's part of what makes these stories resonate so much. They force us to confront these uncomfortable truths about ourselves, to recognize that potential for darkness within each of us. But they also offer a glimmer of hope. They remind us that even when faced with that darkness, there's always the possibility of change, of growth, of redemption.
So it's like, even though these characters are flawed, even though they've done terrible things, we're still drawn to their stories because, I don't know, deep down, we want to believe that change is possible. We want to believe in second chances, in that potential for redemption, for them and for ourselves.
And it's that hope for change that really keeps us hooked on their stories. Both Snape and Draco, they kind of challenge that traditional idea of redemption, like it's some sudden dramatic transformation. Instead, it's these smaller, more internal shifts that we see.
You're right. It's not like they have this epiphany and suddenly become these perfect, saintly figures. They're still flawed. They're complex. They're messy. We still see Snape being unnecessarily harsh with students like Neville, even after everything he's done to protect Harry. It's like, come on, Snape.
Exactly. And Draco, even when he turns away from Voldemort, it's not like he suddenly becomes this champion for Muggle-born rights or anything. It's not about erasing who they are, where they come from, but it's more about this gradual shift in their thinking, a questioning of those deep-seated beliefs that they were raised with.
So is it more about the direction they're heading in rather than reaching some kind of perfect destination?
I think that's a great way to put it. It's like they're on these winding paths, right? There are wrong turns, setbacks along the way, for sure. But ultimately, there's the sense that they're moving away from that darkness.
It makes their stories so much more realistic, relatable even. I mean, we all know people who are genuinely trying to be better, but they mess up, they make mistakes. It doesn't mean they're not trying.
Absolutely. Snape and Draco, they remind us that real redemption, the kind we see in the real world, it's rarely clean cut. It's messy. It's about acknowledging your flaws, owning up to the harm you've caused, and taking those steps to make things right, even when it's hard.
So we've kind of established that both Snape and Draco are on these paths toward redemption. But what do you think is really driving them? Is it guilt, fear of punishment, or is there something more going on there?
I think it goes deeper than that. For Snape, it's that love for Lily, even after all these years, even after her death. It's what pushes him to protect Harry, to try and make up for the things he's done.
And with Draco, it's almost the opposite. It's that fierce loyalty to his family, the thing he's clung to for so long, that actually becomes the catalyst for change. When he sees how Voldemort manipulates and uses him, how his family's values have led to so much pain and suffering, that's when he starts to pull away.
It's like their journeys highlight how the connections we have with other people, they can be both our greatest strength and our greatest weakness. They can lead us down the wrong path, but they can also inspire us to break free, to fight for what we believe in, even when it means going against those we're closest to.
So even though their paths are different, both Snape and Draco, they're ultimately motivated by this desire to protect the people they care about, even if it means challenging their families, their past, everything they've ever known.
And that's a pretty universal experience, wouldn't you say? That need to connect with others, to belong, to find meaning in those relationships. It's something we all crave.
All right, time for the million galleon question. Do either of them actually achieve full redemption? Is there a moment, a clear turning point, where we can say, okay, Snape is redeemed, Draco has seen the light?
That's a question I think Rowling leaves open to interpretation. We see those glimpses of them trying to make things right, their internal struggles, but it's never spelled out for us.
We see Snape ultimately sacrificing himself for Harry and Draco, refusing to join Voldemort in that final battle. But we're left wondering, what happens next? Do they find peace, forgiveness? Do they truly atone for what they've done?
That ambiguity, I think, is what makes these characters stay with us. It forces us to wrestle with those tough questions. Can we ever truly redeem ourselves after doing terrible things? Is redemption even a destination, or is it more like this lifelong journey?
For me, the biggest takeaway is that even the people who've made huge mistakes, those who seem consumed by darkness, they can still try to be better.
That's beautifully said. And it reminds us that we all have the capacity for both darkness and light within us, right? And even when we mess up, we can always try to get back up and do better next time.
It's the trying that matters, the willingness to keep growing and changing.
And that's what makes their stories and stories like theirs so powerful. They remind us that even when we face our flaws, our mistakes, there's always hope. Hope for change, hope for growth, hope for the possibility of redemption.
All right, ready to dive into some seriously dark magic today.
Sounds a bit ominous, but I'm game.
We're tackling Voldemort, trying to figure out if he was always destined to be evil, or did he choose his path?
Nature versus nurture, the age-old debate.
Exactly. Fans have been arguing about this for ages, and I have to admit, even I'm a little nervous to unpack this one. We've got your well-worn copies of the book, some pretty insightful character analyses too. Where do we even begin?
Well, I think what's fascinating about Voldemort is that he really does embody this timeless question. Was he born evil, or did he become that way?
Right.
So I think we need to dissect his childhood.
Okay.
Look at those chilling actions that we all know him for.
Like the really dark stuff.
Yeah, and then compare him to some characters who faced some pretty similar struggles, but ultimately made very different choices.
Okay, so a lot to cover.
It is going to be a journey.
So let's start with that childhood then. Right out of the gate. You mentioned before that Voldemort's conception involved a love potion. I mean, that's got to have some serious implications.
Right, absolutely. I mean, think about it. The foundation of his entire existence was built on a forced, artificial emotion.
Right.
This wasn't a child born out of love.
Yeah, that's true.
And while we can't draw a direct line from a love potion to, a reign of terror,
Right.
it does raise some really intriguing questions about his capacity for things like connection.
Empathy.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like he was, I don't know, almost set up for failure from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And then You add in the whole orphanage situation. I mean, in The Half-Blood Prince, the description of that place, it's chilling. It's not just that it was bleak and loveless.
Right.
It was devoid of any real warmth, any
Yeah.
real human connection.
Exactly. And for a child, especially one who might already be struggling with, that whole love thing, that kind of environment can be so incredibly damaging. Just imagine that complete lack of control, that constant feeling of being at the mercy of others. It's really no surprise that later in life, he becomes so obsessed with controlling everything and everyone around him.
Oh, totally. It's like he's overcompensating for that early powerlessness he felt.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. This is what I keep coming back to. A difficult childhood doesn't automatically make someone a villain, right?
Right.
I mean, plenty of people overcome some serious adversity and choose a path of good.
Oh, absolutely.
So at what point does it become a choice? When do those innate tendencies, if they even exist,
Yeah.
when do they become conscious decisions?
That is the million-galleon question, isn't it? And I think the answer really lies in how Voldemort reacts to those challenges.
But-
He doesn't just try to survive, he tries to dominate.
Yeah.
He uses his magic to isolate himself, to manipulate others, to inflict pain. These aren't the actions of a scared child.
No.
They're the actions of someone who's choosing to embrace darkness.
I think you're right. I keep thinking about those early signs of his cruelty, like the incident with the rabbit in the cave.
Hmm.
It's a small act, but it reveals this disturbing enjoyment of causing suffering.
Yeah.
And as he gets older, I mean, those acts just escalate.
And that escalation is key because with every choice that he makes, every line that he crosses,
Yeah.
he is solidifying his path. It's like he's choosing to just shut off any possibility of empathy or remorse.
Okay, let's talk about those actions then. I mean,
Yeah.
because we can't shy away from the fact that Voldemort committed some truly horrific acts.
Yeah.
I mean, the murder of the Riddles,
Right.
the attack on Harry's parents.
Of course.
These aren't just impulsive acts of violence.
No.
They're calculated, cold-blooded displays of power.
Absolutely. And what makes them even more disturbing is the fact that there's this complete lack of remorse that follows.
Yeah.
I mean, even when he's facing his own potential demise, he clings to these justifications, this twisted ideology that he's created.
Yeah.
There's just no glimmer of regret, no acknowledgement of the pain that he's inflicted on, countless people.
It's interesting that you mentioned ideology,
Yeah.
because another thing that really struck me as we were going through the source material was Voldemort's obsession with this whole blood purity thing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's a half-blood himself, yet he dedicates his life to this idea of magical supremacy.
It's one of the great ironies of his character, isn't it?
It is.
And I think it speaks to this very, very deep-seated self-loathing,
Oh, interesting.
a need to distance himself from his own perceived imperfections.
Okay.
By embracing this incredibly rigid ideology, he's trying to control a world that to him feels chaotic.
Unpredictable.
Exactly.
It's like he's trying to create this artificial order,
Right.
one where he's at the top, and he dictates who belongs and who doesn't.
Absolutely.
But in doing so, he's cutting himself off from any genuine connection, any possibility of finding acceptance or love within himself.
Precisely. And this is where we start to see the real tragedy of Voldemort. He's so consumed by this pursuit of power, his desperate need for control, that he loses sight of what it means to be human.
Yeah.
He becomes a prisoner of his own ideology, unable to escape the cycle of fear and violence that he himself has created.
Wow.
Yeah. As we sort of dig deeper into Voldemort's story,
Yeah.
what really strikes me is how much his choices, not just his circumstances, shape his destiny.
Oh, okay.
It's a chilling example
Yeah.
of how we can become architects of our own darkness.
Ooh, that's a really good point, because in part one, we were talking about that really messed up childhood.
Right.
The love potion, the loveless orphanage.
Yeah.
But then there's this turning point.
Right.
When does young Tom Riddle truly start to embrace that dark path?
I think one of the most crucial turning points
Okay.
is when he discovers his ancestry.
Mm-hmm.
He learns about his connection to Salazar Slytherin.
Right, right.
And it's like the switch flips. He becomes obsessed with this idea of pure blood supremacy.
Yeah.
Even though he himself is a half-blood.
Right. It's like he's rejecting a part of himself
Yeah.
to fit into this twisted ideology.
Exactly.
And that rejection, I
Yeah.
think that's at the heart of his descent.
Exactly. He clings to this idea of inherent magical superiority
Okay.
as a way to justify his growing thirst for power.
Mm.
And this is where I think his time at Hogwarts gets really, really interesting.
Yeah, how so?
Because even as a brilliant student,
Yeah, he was brilliant.
he is already displaying these disturbing tendencies.
Oh, totally.
He's manipulative, secretive,
Yeah.
and drawn to the dark arts.
And Dumbledore sees it.
He does.
Right. He recognizes that potential for darkness within Tom Riddle.
He does. And what's remarkable is that Dumbledore tries to guide him,
Okay.
tries to offer him a different path.
Hmm.
He sees that spark of good in there, a glimmer of hope.
Yeah.
But Riddle just rejects those attempts at connection. He chooses isolation, secrecy, power.
Yeah.
He even goes as far as to open the Chamber of Secrets,
Oh.
unleashing a monster on the school.
It's like he's testing the boundaries,
Yeah.
seeing how far he can go, how much darkness he can embrace
Hmm.
before anyone stops him.
Right.
And what's even more disturbing is that he seems to enjoy it.
Yeah.
He revels in the fear he inspires,
Mm-hmm.
the chaos that he creates.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And this is where this idea of choice
Okay.
becomes so crucial.
Right.
Because at each step,
Yeah.
he could have turned back.
He could have.
He could have accepted Dumbledore's guidance.
Right.
He could have chosen to use his extraordinary talents for good,
For sure.
but he doesn't.
He doesn't.
He consistently chooses the path
Yeah.
that leads him further and further into darkness.
Okay, so we're seeing this progression,
Right.
this gradual descent.
Yes.
But what about the Horcruxes?
Right.
Because that's where things get really dark,
Yeah.
really twisted.
It gets intense.
It's not just about power anymore.
No.
It's about cheating death, about becoming something more, something monstrous almost.
I think the creation of Horcruxes is in many ways the ultimate expression of Voldemort's rejection of his own humanity.
Wow.
To split your soul, to bind yourself to this earthly existence through acts of unspeakable violence, it's a complete perversion of the natural order.
It's like he's so afraid of death. So desperate to cling to power.
Right.
That he's willing to violate the very essence of life itself. And what's fascinating to me is how that choice, that act of creating these Horcruxes seems to physically and emotionally transform him.
Absolutely. It's not just a metaphorical transformation.
Right.
It's a literal one. With each Horcrux he creates, he becomes less human, more a shell of his former self.
Wow.
His appearance becomes more reptilian. His emotions are more muted. His capacity for empathy is all but extinguished.
It's like he's sacrificing his own soul piece by piece in this twisted bargain for immortality. And the irony is, in his quest to conquer death, he becomes more dead inside with every passing year.
And that, I think, is the real tragedy of Voldemort. He achieves this immense power. But at what cost?
That's true.
He isolates himself, surrounds himself with followers who fear him, not love him. He becomes a prisoner of his own making, unable to experience true connection or joy.
Wow. You know, as we're talking about this, I keep thinking about the contrast between Voldemort and Snape. Both experienced difficult childhoods. Both were drawn to the dark arts. But Snape ultimately chooses a path of redemption.
He does.
He risks his life to protect Harry, to atone for his past mistakes.
Snape is a perfect example of how even someone who has made just terrible choices can still find redemption. It's powerful.
He chooses love in his own way over power. He chooses self-sacrifice over self-preservation. And in doing so, he breaks free from that cycle of darkness that consumes Voldemort.
It's a reminder that even in the face of really intense darkness, there's always a choice.
Absolutely.
Always a possibility of turning towards the light. But Voldemort never seems to see that possibility.
It's true.
He's so consumed by his own pain, his own fear, that he can't even recognize the love that's offered to him.
And that, I think, is the ultimate tragedy. He chooses isolation over connection, power over love, fear over hope.
Wow.
And in the end, those choices lead him not to immortality, but to a kind of living death.
So we've seen how Voldemort's choices, his very deliberate embrace of darkness, shapes him into the villain that we all know and sometimes love to hate. But is there any coming back from that? Can someone who has sunk so deep into evil ever truly find redemption?
I have to admit, I'm struggling. with this one.
That is the question, isn't it?
It is.
And it's one we're going to grapple with in our final part, because understanding whether Voldemort could have been redeemed is crucial to answering the question of whether anyone is truly beyond hope.
All right, so we've really gone deep now, haven't we? We've journeyed through Voldemort's childhood, his descent into darkness, compared him to those who, ultimately found redemption. But I think the big question still remains.
Yeah, it does.
Could Voldemort himself have been redeemed?
It's a tough one.
It feels almost impossible.
Yeah.
But is there even like a sliver of a chance?
It's the question that really haunts us, doesn't it?
It does.
Because if someone like Voldemort, who truly embodies this profound evil, if he could find redemption, then maybe there's hope for anyone, right?
Right.
But to answer that,
I think we have to look for those cracks in his facade.
Okay.
Those moments where something else peeks through.
Okay, so are we talking about that moment in Deathly Hallows?
Yeah.
When he asks Snape to spare Lily Potter?
Right.
Some might see that as, I don't know, like a sign of affection? A flicker of humanity.
It is a fascinating moment, isn't it?
It is.
Because it reveals a kind of attachment.
Yeah.
A possessiveness.
Yeah, right.
But is it genuine care?
Right, yeah.
For another person's well-being? Or is it, as you astutely pointed out earlier, about control?
Yeah, that's it.
About seeing Lily as a prize to be won or lost.
That's what makes it so hard to decipher. He ultimately chooses to kill her.
He does.
When she defies him. Right. So was that plea ever really about her?
Right.
Or was it all about his own ego? His need to get what he wants?
Exactly. And that's where this whole idea of redemption gets really tricky. It does.
Because it's not just about fleeting moments of vulnerability or even regret. Right. It's about a fundamental shift in perspective, a willingness to confront one's own darkness, to feel remorse, for the harm that you've caused.
And that's where Voldemort falls short. Yeah. Time and again.
Again and again.
He never really truly acknowledges the pain that he inflicts, the lives he destroys. Right. He clings to these twisted justifications, his belief in his own superiority. It's like he's built this impenetrable wall around his heart, just shutting out any possibility of empathy or compassion.
You're right. It's as though he made this conscious decision to sever those ties with his humanity, to become something.
Yeah.
Something monstrous.
Monstrous, yeah. And with every act of cruelty, every Horcrux he creates, that wall just gets thicker,
Yeah, thicker and thicker.
That separation more absolute.
It's chilling, isn't it?
It is.
Look at that.
But you mentioned Dumbledore.
I did.
Earlier. And he saw something in young Tom Riddle. Right. A glimmer of hope.
Yeah.
And he didn't he try to reach him, to offer him a different path?
He did, time and again. Right. Dumbledore reached out, offered guidance, a chance at connection. Yeah. But Voldemort just rejected those attempts.
He did.
He chose isolation. Yeah. Secrecy, the allure of power.
Right. It's almost like like he believed that to be strong, to achieve his goals. Yeah. He had to shut off any part of himself that might make him weak. Right. That might make him question his path. Yeah. But wouldn't that, in a way, make him even more vulnerable?
Absolutely. Because in rejecting connection, in embracing fear and control, he ultimately isolates himself. Yeah. He becomes a prisoner of his own making.
Right.
Surrounded by followers who fear him, not love him.
It's true.
And that, I think, is one of the most tragic consequences.
It is.
Of his choice.
So we've talked about Snape's redemption.
Yeah.
But it's also interesting to contrast Voldemort with someone like Regulus Black. He started down a very similar path. Drawn to the allure of power and belonging. Yeah. But he ultimately chooses to defy Voldemort. Right. To sacrifice himself, to try and weaken him.
Regulus's story is so powerful.
It is.
Because it reminds us that even within a system of oppression, within a group,
Hmm.
dedicated to evil.
Right.
Individuals have the capacity to
Yeah.
choose differently.
Right.
He recognized the horror of what he'd become a part of,
Right.
felt remorse,
Yeah.
and chose to act, even at the cost of his own life.
So even within Voldemort's inner circle,
Right.
there were those who found redemption,
Mm.
who chose a different path.
Yeah.
Which kind of brings us back to that original question.
Yeah.
Could Voldemort have done the same?
It's impossible to say for sure,
Yeah.
but I think the evidence suggests that he chose
Yeah.
a path of no return.
Right.
He deliberately closed himself off
Yeah.
to empathy, to remorse,
Yeah.
to any possibility of connection.
Right.
He really believed that power, control, and immortality were the only things worth
Wow.
striving for.
Yeah.
And in the end, those beliefs, those
Right.
choices, I think, led to his downfall.
It's a profound
Yeah,
and disturbing thought.
it is.
But as we kind of wrap up this deep dive here,
Yeah.
I think the takeaway is pretty clear.
Mm.
We all have choices
We do.
to make.
Yeah.
We can choose to, to build those walls around our hearts,
Right.
to cling to power and control,
Yeah.
to reject empathy and connection,
Right.
or we can choose to be vulnerable,
Yeah.
to love, to forgive,
Mhm.
to see the humanity in others.
Absolute.
Voldemort's story is a cautionary tale,
It is.
a reminder that the path we choose shapes not only our own destiny,
Right.
but also the world around us.
Beautifully put.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for guiding us through this dark and fascinating journey.
It's been a pleasure.
And to our listeners, keep questioning, keep exploring,
Yeah. Keep learning.
and keep choosing the light.
Choose the light.
We'll see you on our next deep dive.